I wasn't expecting to find it that interesting. But as you know, the next in our Global Elite book series is the Tim Leary Psychedelic Experience, which we kind of touched on when we talked to Cotel, our friend David Patrick Harry. But we didn't get deep into the book. We kind of focused on his research into the Far Eastern philosophical systems, which he's very studied in. So he's the expert in that. I don't know a whole lot about that realm of philosophy. I've read a few things here and there. We've read some books, had some discussions with Far Eastern minded thinkers and people, but we kind of typically take the track of argumentation, which we discussed with David, which is that the Far Eastern philosophies usually fall over into monism, dualism, pantheism, etc. So they're pretty easy to kind of box together under one overriding kind of metaphysical starting point, typically. So in that regard, there's not a whole lot really to, quote, refute from an apologetics perspective, but there are some interesting, at times, parallels and comparative religion discussions that you can have to parcel out, true and false statements here and there. And as you know, we've done the longer discussion of Father Seraphim Rose's book, Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, which does deal with quite a few of these Far Eastern religions. And, he makes those same critiques that we pointed out, right? Monism, dualism. They're very useful from a social engineering perspective for the elite mindset of trying to, get everything into a global glob. The perennial philosophy, in that sense, according to the way Huxley conceives of the perennial philosophy in his book, The Perennial Philosophy. He basically says that these Far Eastern systems are very useful to global social engineering, New World Order interests, precisely because they group everybody into the giant blob. Remember the blob? Actually, like the 80s blob. The 80s B-movie of the blob is pretty good. And in a roundabout way, you could say it's kind of making this point with Far Eastern thought. So we're going to be touching on the first half of this as we talk about what Empty Man's about. We're going to give my explanation of what the movie is about. And we're going to see a lot of parallels with, but necessary distinctions between this and Orthodox theology. St. Gregory Palamas, the uncreated light. The typical false accusation from a lot of the opponents of what we talk about is, oh, you guys just teach yoga, right? It's just yoga. It's meditating to dissolve yourself into the one. It's Neoplatonism. It's this, it's that. None of which is actually true. Of course, the early church fathers spent many years, many of the councils, as Father Meyendorff says in his book, combating Hellenism and combating Neoplatonism. And after many centuries, you have the victory over Origenism, which is the real essential codification of a version of pseudo-Christian Neoplatonism, right? It's ultimately Platonic metaphysics wrapped up in Christian garb, and the 5th, 6th, and 7th councils pretty much eliminate that. But one area that we've not really spent a lot of time on, we did cover it when I covered Losky's dogmatic theology, is the aeon. And this is the timeless created realm. And the reason that we're interested in that is that a lot of people who do meditation, they get into the Far Eastern stuff, when they have experiences, or people who've done hallucinogens, when they have the hallucinogenic experience and they see non-material, transcendent types of things like the light that they experience, they will mistake these things, which are still in the domain of the created, the noetic realm, for God. This is what Platonism does. Platonism mistakes what we would say is the created aeon, the noetic realm, where we would place a lot of the created geometrical forms, the angelic abode, you could say, the noetic realm. It's non-material, right? It's noetic. They're called the noetic powers, the angels. The noosphere, which will actually come up in the book, or in the movie Empty Man. People mistake that for God, right? And this is how, for example, Paul can say Satan can appear as an angel of light and deceive people because, oh, well, I had a spiritual experience. It must be good, therefore. Really? Maybe you had a demonic spiritual experience, right? Just because you felt good, right? You can't make subjective states of feeling good or whatever, pleasures. That's not necessarily of God, per se. And a lot of these experiences, of course, are accompanied by terrors, right? Horrible experiences. I had a bad trip the first time I did acid, and we've covered that many, many years ago. I don't do anything like that anymore, but back when I was in high school, I had the bad trip. We've covered that, Martin Landau's face melting and all that. Fun stories that were hellacious at the time. But we're going to see how we don't want to get into the delusion. And this is the main warning here, is that these kinds of things, right, they're not totally wrong in the sense of, oh, you never had that experience, or you didn't have a spiritual experience. No, you probably had a spiritual experience, but that doesn't mean it was a good spiritual experience, or that it was of God, right? So discernment is the key here. How do we discern between a vision, an experience of the beyond, of the transcendent, of whatever, from being from God, from ourselves, or perhaps from the angelic realm? And from the angelic realm could conceivably be evil or good, right? So we can't operate with that basic bitch level understanding that anything that's a spiritual experience is therefore good, right? This is the typical kind of new age attitude, right? It doesn't make any sense. That will all be very interesting when we get into this book. I'm halfway through the book now, so I have a little bit better context to deal with this. But when we talked to Kotel about all this, he agreed, right? And he is finishing his PhD in these topics. Now, the introduction in this book is Daniel Pinchbeck. Now, I was invited on a few streams, I think, that he's been on, but I never did take that up. Maybe I should have. I don't know. I don't know Daniel Pinchbeck. I've never talked to him, but I don't really think he would be a huge fan of Jay's analysis, but I don't know. Maybe he would be. Welcome, everybody, by the way. Yes, the devil, as Father Deacon Dr. Ananias says, I am spiritual, but I'm not religious. The classic phrase of the devil. How do you like my Buddhist chant? Now, as you know, Tibetan Buddhism, again, this is not my arena, but everything I know about Tibetan Buddhism I learned from Twin Peaks, The Golden Child, and Empty Man. Tibetan Buddhism is a combination of the philosophic Buddhism with the indigenous older religion of the Himalayan blah 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 region. So it has a weird kind of syncretic thing of this philosophical strands of Buddhism proper, and then the indigenous animistic gods and demons worldview. So it's an interesting mix. It is, as you know, the entire basis of many David Lynch movies, but really Twin Peaks. As you know, tulpas. Right? If you're a big Twin Peaks fan, you know the tulpas play a big role in Twin Peaks, especially the new season with Dougie. Dougie was a tulpa. But in the movie, let's get into this movie, and then we'll move into Leary's psychedelic experience. It's 1995, and these, by the way, that was in the period when Free Tibet, all this Tibet, blah, blah, blah nonsense was everywhere. That was a CIA-aided operation. The Free Tibet was basically a creation, a kind of a cutout. You can look that up in terms of the LA Times has an article on it. New York Times. The Dalai Lama has kind of been, either an asset or friendly to the CIA for a long time. And it's pretty obvious why. You could see why that would be the case. That doesn't make the Chinese versus Tibet. I'm not taking a side there. I don't really... This is in the realm of geopolitics. And so that's really beyond question. Ingdahl has a whole chapter on Dalai Lama and Free Tibet. That was a thing in the 90s. I was in the 90s. Were you in the 90s? I was. And in the 90s... there was Free Tibet, right? And MTV used to promote Free Tibet. And if you recall, Twin Peaks Agent Dale Cooper. For whatever reason, he's all obsessed with free Tibet. Okay, so this was a kind of a color revolution theory. If I remember in Ingdahl's chapter, he characterizes it as in this overall model of color revolutions. And it had, a larger geopolitical game to play. It has nothing really to do with freeing Tibet. It has everything to do with, the East-West geopolitics stuff. And so it makes sense why in 1995 you have this team of people going up into Bhutan and basically they... And yes, if you've not seen the movie, I'm going to, kind of give you my analysis. So be prepared. Thank you for those super chats. We'll get to those in a minute. So you got this team of, 20-somethings, Nirvana fans, going up into Bhutan. They're hiking way up into these mountains. They cross a bridge. So the beginning of the movie is the crossing of the bridge. The bridge will come up many, many times in the film. It's a key symbol. And it just symbolizes, I believe, the passage, the bridge from this world to the next. Okay, here and there. And so they're hiking over this bridge. It's got all the little, Tibetan little, trinkets hanging around the bridge or whatever. They love all those little trinkets and shit hanging from stuff. And one of the unfortunate cool dudes falls down a hole. He falls down it looks like a well, but he just falls down this hole, and there's a bone. Excuse me, I forgot the bone flute. Okay, this is not a crude sex joke, although it was difficult not to make crude sex jokes when they blow the bone flute. But the dude blows the bone flute, just kind of like this thing he found, I guess, on the ground, or they picked up at some market, right? You always pick up like the most cursed item at like a Tijuana flea market or some shit, right? Like, it's like, oh crap, I just got, Satan's flute, literally at the market. Sucks to be me, right? And so he blows this bone flute, and the whole time I'm watching this, I'm thinking of doo 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 doo. I was waiting for the little, right? Zelda. Hello, Zelda. And by the way, did you know the flute in Mario is the same sound as the flute in Zelda? The idea of playing the flute, the pan flute, Pan, who is Pan? Was the devil, of course, right? So what does this mean? Well, there is in some of these Far Eastern religions, I actually put it in one of my analyses in the book. I've already forgot. It may not be in the book. It's my Mad Max analysis. I was reading about Far Eastern things, and there is this notion, what is the name of that word? What is that word? The name of the word. It's the whole idea why they chant. Okay, so when you're chanting or when you're singing, it's a sound vibration that's intended to evoke a plane of existence, one of the celestial spheres. This goes back to the idea that the celestial spheres are playing a tune, a note. This is why, by the way, in Twin Peaks you have the record player that's playing the universe. Right? It's playing the universe in season 3. Anyway, there's a name for this, which is why they chant certain intonations to basically harmonize with a level of vibrational frequencies, right? Yeah, all these New Agers talk about it, but there's something probably true. I think there's truth to this, right? Different layers of reality, planes of existence do relate to, I think, different notes and sounds. If you've read the Narnia story, then in Magician's nephew, Aslan sings creation into existence. I don't know how all that works, but this is an old idea, right? It goes back to the ancient world. I think there's something to this. And so this seems to be retained in some way in these Tibetan notions. So when you're doing these, or you're trying to harmonize your frequency with their frequencies, man, this kind of a thing. And if you do, in I think Hinduism, they have the notion that there is a God form. right? So when you achieve, this is the same principle behind why they do the different, patterns when they do yoga, is they're trying to invoke a God form. Roughly the same idea here. Probably people in the audience can remember this term that I can't think of. But so he plays the bone flute. Oh, sucks to be you, dude, because you just played Satan's bone flute. Okay, this is the worst possible flute that you could ever get a hold of and hoot with. And they don't even play it; they just hoot, don't they? Mm-hmm. Hoot, hoot. Right. So you play the bone flute, you're gonna lose your soul, and that's what happens here. Thank you. Yeah. Where are we at? Okay, so the dude falls down in this pit, right? So he's accidentally played the worst flute ever. He does it, falls down this pit. He's kind of led off into the distance in a trance after playing the flute. And when he falls down there, it's just this little cave with like this bizarre spider skeleton thing, right? So there's like a dead skeleton thing. And you notice that it is, the hands of this thing are like this, okay? This will be throughout the film. Okay, every time somebody picks up a flute or a bottle to blow, they hold it like such. Okay, and this is everywhere, and this is on purpose because this is, well, first of all, it's a skeleton, right? So it's death. What is death? Death is a kind of moving into non-being, right? I'm not saying when you die you literally become non-being, but I'm saying there's a connection between death and privation and non-being or non-existence. That will play heavily into this film, its symbolism, and the empty man. Who is the empty man? Ultimately we'll see, but when you're emptied out, you become a vessel. But this movie is about possession, ultimately.